The land was ours. 5 acres of rolling green, kissed by golden sunsets and framed by the soft whisper of pine trees swaying in the breeze. It was perfect, our little sanctuary in Pinecrest Hollow. Olivia and I had spent years saving, dreaming, and searching for a place we could call home. And now, standing on our land, I could finally feel it. I knelt down, running my fingers through the soil, letting the earth sift through my hands as I smiled. This is where it all begins, I said. Olivia twirled beside me, barefoot in the grass, her auburn hair catching the light. She pointed toward the open space near the stream. The dance floor should go there, she said. Imagine it, Jackson. Twinkling lights overhead, music filling the air, and no noise complaints. That last part was something we both knew too well. For years, we'd lived in a cramped apartment, where neighbors pounded on walls if we so much as laughed too loud. Now, we were free. No rules, no landlords, no restrictions. Just us, our friends, and the perfect wedding. At least, that's what we thought. The distant crunch of tires on gravel made me look up. A sleek black Range Rover crept up the driveway, moving slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. Olivia stopped twirling, her smile fading. "Who's that?" she whispered. I had no idea, but something told me that whoever was in that car wasn't here to congratulate us. The car rolled to stop, and after a long, deliberate pause, the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out mid-50s, clad in an immaculate white pantsuit, her heels crunching against the gravel. A pair of oversized designer sunglasses concealed her eyes, but her stance, her expression, the sheer aura of authority around her screamed entitlement. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice razor-sharp, slicing through the warm afternoon air. "What exactly are you doing here?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over, offering a polite smile. "Hi there," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Jackson Miller. My fiancé and I just bought this land. We're setting up for our wedding." She ignored my hand, pulled out a tablet, and began scrolling with rapid precision. "I'm Eleanor Winthrop," she announced, not looking up, "president of the Pinecrest Community Association." I raised an eyebrow. "Community Association?" Eleanor tapped the screen and then sighed dramatically, as if she had just discovered some great injustice. "You haven't submitted any plans for approval," she said flatly, "for any of this." I blinked. Approval? For what? She gestured to our measuring tapes and stakes, as if they were toxic waste. For construction, for external structures, for everything. I chuckled, shaking my head. "This is private property," I said. "We don't need approval." Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin, cold line. "Every property in Pinecrest Hollow is subject to our community guidelines," she said smoothly. Section 8, Paragraph 4 states that all external structures require committee review, and Paragraph 12 limits outdoor gatherings to 20 people without a special permit. I felt Olivia tense beside me. "There must be some mistake," she said. "When we bought the property, there was no mention of an HOA. Eleanor gave a slow, rehearsed shake of the head. "No mistake," she said. I folded my arms. "Well, we have 200 guests coming in 3 weeks," I said, "and neither my realtor nor the county mentioned anything about an HOA. For the first time, Eleanor looked slightly annoyed. She reached into her leather case and pulled out a crisp business card. "I suggest," she said, voice laced with thinly veiled authority, "that you read our bylaws carefully and submit the proper applications. Immediately. Otherwise, we will be forced to take action." With that, she spun on her heel, climbed back into her Range Rover, and pulled away, slowly, deliberately. At the end of the driveway, I noticed something else. A small group of neighbors had gathered, watching, judging. None of them looked friendly. "She can't do this, right?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking slightly. I squeezed her hand, forcing a confident smile. "Of course not," I said. "I'll call Marcus tomorrow. He's a real estate attorney. He'll straighten this out." But that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at our kitchen table, documents spread out before me. Property deeds, sale agreements, county zoning maps. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere, did it say we were under an HOA. The next morning, I stepped outside and froze. A white envelope was stuck to our front door. Inside was a printed notice. Violation number 1, unauthorized construction planning. Violation number 2, failure to submit exterior design plans. Violation number 3, plan gathering exceeding size limitations. 48 hours to comply before penalties begin accruing. $100 per day. My blood boiled. I crushed the paper in my fist, then thought better of it. Smoothed it out again. Evidence. This was going to get ugly. 3 days later, Marcus sat across from me, reading through every document with the trained eye of a man who smelled bullshit from a mile away. "This is bizarre," he muttered, pushing his glasses up. "Your property is clearly outside their jurisdiction. The Pinecrest Community Association only covers the new subdivision, half a mile east of here." Relief flooded through me. "So, we just ignore them, right?" Marcus frowned. "Not exactly," he said. "These types of HOAs, they can be persistent. They don't care about right or wrong. They care about control." My jaw clenched. "Draft the strongest legal response you can," I said. Marcus nodded. "You got it, but be prepared for a fight." And a fight is exactly what we got. The next morning, I stepped outside and felt my stomach drop. Red violation flags were planted all around the perimeter of our property, dozens of them. A bold black notice was nailed to our fence. Stop work order. Unauthorized development. I stormed forward, yanking one of the flags out of the ground. "That's tampering with official notices," a voice shouted. I turned. Across the road, a middle-aged man in a golf polo held up his phone, recording me. "I'm reporting this," he snapped. I had never seen this man before in my life. And yet, he stood there, smirking, as if he'd won some great victory. That evening, as Olivia broke down crying in my arms, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't about wedding permits. This was about power. And if Eleanor thought I was going to roll over and let her win, she had another thing coming. The rain started before sunrise. I was sipping coffee on the porch, watching Miss curl over fields when I heard the low rumble of engines. At first, I thought it was the early arrival of our wedding vendors. But when I stepped onto the driveway, my heart sank. 3 white utility trucks sat parked at the edge of our land, hazard lights flashing. Men in reflective vests were hammering stakes into ground, stretching bright orange string in a zigzag line that cut right through the spot where we planned to pitch the wedding tent. I marched toward them. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" A man in a hard hat glanced up, clipboard in hand. "County Planning Commission," he said casually. "We're marking utility easements." I frowned. "There are no easements on this property." He tapped his clipboard. "Work order filed last week by the Pinecrest Community Association. Says there's a gas line survey needed across this section." "Gas line?" My mouth went dry. "That's impossible. We surveyed this land ourselves before buying. There are no gas lines here." He shrugged. "Not my call. Just doing the markings. If you got an issue, you'll need to take it up with the county." And just like that, the stakes were in the ground, sliced into the heart of our wedding site, an ugly orange web threatening to unravel everything we'd planned. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about utilities. It was Eleanor, again, and she wasn't just playing dirty anymore, she was escalating. The hits came faster after that. By the time Olivia got home that night, exhausted from her teaching job, I had news, and none of it good. She filed a gas line claim. I told her, handing over the county notice. Completely fabricated. Can she get away with this? Olivia asked, her voice rising. What are we supposed to do now? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a skinny teenager holding a stack of papers. "Jackson Miller?" he asked nervously. "That's me." "You've been served." He thrust the documents at me and bolted down the steps like the devil was chasing him. I flipped through the pages. It was a temporary restraining order, prohibiting us from constructing unapproved structures or hosting unauthorized gatherings on our own land, filed by the HOA. The hearing date? 3 days after our wedding. Olivia collapsed onto the couch. "They're going to ruin everything." "No," I said, pacing. This isn't just about us anymore. This is war. And if they wanted war, I was ready. That night, I didn't sleep. Again. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed Eleanor Winthrop's name into every public records database I could find. Her name popped up like a trail of breadcrumbs leading through one legal disaster after another. Lawsuits, noise complaints, civil harassment claims, HOA enforcement abuse. She wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a professional tyrant. But what really caught my attention was her former affiliation with a company called Valley Vista Development, the firm responsible for building the new Pine Crest Hollow subdivision. I clicked through more documents. My eyes widened. Valley Vista was currently seeking permits for a major expansion, an expansion that extended dangerously close to our property. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about a wedding. It never had been. This was about land. And more importantly, what lay beneath it. 2 days later, I returned to the county records office. Rita, the older clerk who'd helped me before, recognized me instantly. "You again," she chuckled. "Still fighting that HOA mess?" "You have no idea," I replied, holding up the latest restraining order. "Come with me." We spent hours combing through old township maps, land records, and homestead files. And then we found it. A faded deed from 1887, stamped with the seal of the original Pine Crest land grant. Rita traced her finger over a series of survey markers. "See this?" she said. "Your land isn't just outside their jurisdiction. It was never even part of the development map. But here's the real kicker." She opened another drawer and pulled out a dusty leather ledger. "This book tracks mineral rights transfers," she said. "Look whose name is on the original entry." I leaned in. Howard Jackson, my great-grandfather. And according to the official records, those mineral rights had never been sold or reassigned. They were passed down through the family, first to my father and now to me. I wasn't just the owner of our 5 acres. I was the legal holder of mineral rights that extended beneath half of Pine Crest Hollow. Eleanor's subdivision sat on my mineral estate, and with all the recent buzz about natural gas exploration in the region, that made me a very important man. I left the records office with certified copies and a plan forming in my head, a plan Eleanor wouldn't see coming until it was too late. I could have kept the discovery to myself, could have sold the rights quietly and walked away with a fat check and a destination wedding in Maui. But every time I thought about giving in, I remembered Olivia crying on our porch. I remembered the neighbors who watched silently as we were harassed. I remembered the smug look on Eleanor's face as she tore our joy to shreds. So I didn't sell out. I started organizing. That evening, I went door to door to the older properties outside the HOA's grasp, places like ours that had been there long before Valley Vista broke ground. I met Thomas Jenkins, a weathered old farmer with hands like oak bark. "They fined me for leaving my tractor in the yard," he said. Said it violated community aesthetics. Maria Gonzalez, a single mom 2 houses down, said they tried to shut down her daughter's birthday party for unauthorized noise levels. They weren't just targeting us. They were targeting everyone who didn't fit the HOA's perfect little mold. By the end of the week, I had a stack of signed affidavits detailing harassment, unlawful fines, intimidation tactics, and forced sales. More importantly, I had something Eleanor never anticipated, a united front of neighbors tired of being pushed around. And I had leverage, real leverage, because while she thought she could bury us under paperwork and threats, she'd forgotten one thing. You can't scare the man who owns the ground you walk on. The neighborhood felt different now, a tension in the air, like the moment before a storm cracks the sky. But this time, I wasn't the one caught in it. With certified documents in hand, affidavits from neighbors, and the truth about the mineral rights stitched into the very bedrock beneath the HOA's feet, it was finally time to strike back. I met Marcus in our makeshift war room, the kitchen table now buried under legal briefs, boundary maps, and court filing folders. "We're not waiting for their next move," I said. "We go public. Now." That afternoon, I sat across from Diane, the local news anchor from Channel 7, the cameras rolling as I shared everything, the harassment, the fraudulent citations, the restraining orders, the illegal utility claims, and most importantly, The truth about the land. Diane's eyes widened as I slid the mineral rights documents across the table. You're telling me you own the mineral rights under the entire subdivision? She asked. Not just the subdivision, I replied. Under the entire Pinecrest Hollow development, including the HOA president's house and the sheriff's vacation property. Her stunned silence said it all. That night, the story aired, and Pinecrest Hollow exploded. I should have been focusing on my vows and my suit, but instead, I was fielding media calls, checking legal filings, and finalizing backup wedding plans in case the HOA made good on its threats. They did. The morning before the wedding, a new court notice arrived, this time signed by Judge Wallace, the same judge whose son just happened to be Eleanor's attorney. The notice claimed ongoing public safety risks and civil disruption potential. It even labeled our wedding a community hazard. But we were ready. We filed an emergency motion of our own, with backup from the county recorder's office, the state's attorney general, and a surprise wild card, the county commissioner, Catherine Reynolds, who had apparently been watching from the sidelines. I've had my own issues with that HOA, she said on a phone call the night before the ceremony. You'll have my full support. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. Wedding chairs on one side, sheriff patrol cars on the other, and news vans parked squarely in between. I'd always imagined the moment I saw Olivia in her wedding dress would be one of serenity, a soft gasp, the clatter of my heart skipping. Instead, it was drowned out by the whir of a news drone overhead and the low rumble of 3 police cruisers pulling up the driveway just as guests began taking their seats. Eleanor stepped out of her black SUV as if descending a royal throne, clipboard in hand, smirking like the villain in a courtroom drama. This gathering is unauthorized, she announced loudly, waving papers in the air, and in violation of county zoning ordinances. Marcus stepped forward, firm and fearless. That court order was improperly filed and is under review. The sheriff doesn't think so, Eleanor sneered. He didn't. Not yet, anyway. Minutes later, I was in handcuffs, my guests in shocked silence, Olivia screaming as she ran toward the officers, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a flag of defiance. It should have been a moment of humiliation. But then, Marcus held up the folder. Sheriff, before you make a career-ending mistake, you may want to look at these. The camera crew zoomed in, the reporters leaned forward, and the balance of power shifted in an instant. The sheriff flipped through the documents, pausing at the mineral rights deed. His expression changed from confident to pale. You're telling me he owns the mineral rights under all this? Marcus nodded. And that court order? Signed by a judge whose son represents the plaintiff. That's called conflict of interest. The sheriff looked at me, then the cameras, then Eleanor. I think we need to reassess, he muttered. And just like that, the cuffs were off. I was free, and Eleanor was finally out of control. The guests, confused but cheering, rearranged the chairs. My cousins blocked the driveway with their trucks, preventing further interference. Olivia and I stood beneath the wooden arch we built with our own hands, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and a dozen reporters who were now witnesses to more than just a ceremony. They were watching a revolution in real time. I do, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I do, Olivia echoed, tears in her eyes. And as the officiant pronounced as husband and wife, the crowd erupted into applause, not just for a marriage, but for a moment of justice. The reception turned into something more, a gathering of voices sharing HOA horror stories, a town hall in disguise. People came forward with stories of fines for flower pots, violations for garden gnomes, even threats over children's toys on front porches. It wasn't just our victory. It was everyone's. And we weren't done yet. 3 days later, we postponed our honeymoon. Instead, Olivia and I sat in a courtroom, alongside Marcus, the county commissioner, and a growing file of evidence against the Pinecrest HOA, evidence of fraudulent citations, falsified court filings, intimidation tactics, and impersonation of law enforcement. A whistleblower, a former HOA assistant, came forward, providing internal documents showing years of illegal collections and targeting of elderly and immigrant homeowners. The district attorney took the case. The HOA was dissolved. Eleanor fled town. But that wasn't the end. We took our first mineral lease check and established a Pinecrest Homeowner Relief Fund, reimbursing every homeowner who'd been wrongfully fined. I donated part of our land to build a new community center, replacing the old HOA clubhouse with a legal aid office and public resource hub. The signs at the Pinecrest gates were changed. Where once it read Private Community, Rules Enforced, it now read, Welcome to Pinecrest, a community, not a colony. And then came the final twist. 3 months after our wedding, Catherine Reynolds returned to our property with a document in hand. The state legislature passed new HOA reform laws, she said. They're calling it the Jackson Act. I laughed. All I wanted was to get married in peace. You did more than that, Olivia whispered, wrapping her arms around me as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. Our neighbors gathered again that night, not for a protest or a hearing, but to celebrate a new chapter, one written not in bylaws or citations, but in community, freedom, and courage. And from the very ground beneath us, we built something no HOA could ever regulate, a legacy